Well, hello and welcome to the Tadaima Book Club live programming with Larry Matsuda. And we're featuring his book called My Name is Not Viola. And I'll be interviewing him. My name is Anna Tamara, and this is such a pleasure to be presenting with Larry and interviewing him. I'm going to give a short bio, and then we're going to transition to some photographs. So I'd like to read the biography of Larry. Here we go. Lawrence Matsuda was born in the Minidoka, Idaho War Relocation Center or concentration camp during World War II. Matsuda holds a Ph.D. in education from the University of Washington and was a Seattle Schools secondary teacher, University of Washington University counselor, a state-level administrator, a Seattle Public Schools principal, Seattle Assistant Superintendent, educational consultant, visiting professor at Seattle University, and a school design consultant. He is a published poet, writer, community activist, and regional Emmy award-winning writer for the animated version of An American Hero, Shiro Kashino. So now I'd like to turn it over to Larry.
Oh, thank you, Anna, and good evening to everyone out there, and thank you for attending. I also want to thank Aaron Shigaki, Aaron Oyama, Mia Russell, Hanako Wakasuki Chong, the Minidoka Pilgrimage, Friends of Minidoka, and people at Tadaima for making this event happen. So thank you all very much. I also want to thank Roger Shimamura and Alfredo Aragin for my cover art, and Tess Gallagher and Jay Rubin for his editing help. Also want to thank my wife, Karen, for her help and support through the writing of this novel and her critiques as well. So this is a picture of my mother, and again, the novel was based on my mother's experience. And this is on a boardwalk, I believe it's Dearborn Street, and it's near the Russell Hotel, and she looks like she's about 10 years old in this photo. It's in Seattle. And this is 1939. My mother's on the far left, and this is in front of the Presbyterian Church, which plays a part in the novel, and with two friends, and they look familiar, but I just don't know who they are. So 1939. Oh, and this is me and my brother and my mother at camp. My brother Alan is there, always a frown. And there I am, bald-headed, but I'm wearing a hood there, a hoodie. And that's my mother. And we were in Block 26, Barracks 2, Minidoka, Idaho.
I'm now going to read a synopsis of the book, My Name is Not Viola. The novel recounts the life of a Japanese-American woman, Hane Tamura, who was born in Seattle, sent to Hiroshima for an education, graduated from high school in Seattle, and married. In her lifetime, she is incarcerated twice. During World War II, she is one of 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans unjustly forced into American concentration camps. Years later, she is incarcerated again at the Western State Mental Hospital because of depression. Throughout her life, she struggles against forces larger than herself. While on this journey, she is regarded as an outsider in the USA and as a gaijin, or foreigner, in Hiroshima. In both countries, her challenge is to live a productive life in spite of obstacles, fate, and places in her past. To endure, she draws strength from Japanese values and Christianity to help keep her American dream alive, which is to walk through downtown Seattle and feel as though she belongs. Even though it is such a simple goal, it never happens. This outcome raises two questions. Is it the weight of her past that shackles her mind and prevents transformation and growth? Or are there traumas that never fully heal but fester and reopen periodically, triggered by a sound, odor, or memories? So the first question, Larry, for you is share with us some information about your past written work.
Okay, I brought the books, so I have some visuals, so I'm not just a talking head, and so I'm going to move really fast because I don't want to bore you. But the first one is A Cold Wind from Idaho, and it's about Minidoka, and it was published in 2010, and it's one of my favorites. The second one, the cover is by Roger Shimomura. It's Glimpses of a Forever Foreigner. And Roger and I did this together, and he did 17 original sketches for the book. The next one is one that I did with Tess Gallagher, and it's called Boogie Woogie Crisscross, and it has almost nothing to do with the relocation camp, and it is cuckoo crazy. If you want a real wild ride, this is your book. It is what it looks like. Then I did a graphic novel, Chapter 1, Shiro Kashino. And this was animated by the Seattle channel. We won a regional Emmy for that. So I won a regional Emmy. That was a surprise to me. So it makes me want to think that my next award should be an Oscar. But that might be another life. So that's something about the work. And mainly, my work has been in poetry, but I always feel that you should always try something different. So I moved from poetry to graphic novel. I wrote a play, which later became Viola. My Name is Not Viola. The play was just a bunch of people talking, and I thought, well, that's not going to make it. So I turned it into a novel. So that's kind of my background in terms of writing.
That's fantastic. Okay. My next question for you is, why did you decide to write this book and feature a fictionalized version of your mother as the main character?
Okay, I believe everyone has a novel in them that just needs to come out. And so with that belief, I looked at myself and I said, what is your novel? And I decided that my mother had a better novel in her than I. So I decided to focus in on my novel, but obviously I didn't know everything, so I had to kind of fill in the gaps. So it had to be fiction. So it's historic fiction. And the act of writing a novel is like creating an imaginary world and populating it with memorable characters. And in doing so, you as an author have to take some liberties with reality. And so that's why it's fiction. And for me, the act of writing this novel reminds me of Frost's poem, The Road Less Traveled By. Two roads diverged in a wood. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Writing this novel was like coming to the fork in the road. I chose one path and lived it. And going back and writing the novel gave me an opportunity to revisit that fork in the road and take the other path through fiction. So I experienced much of the same events, but this time with different outcomes. And I won't say it was cathartic, but it made me pause and evaluate the road I took in real life and what might have happened. So that's my answer.
Okay. Can you share with us the major elements of the novel?
Right. One major concept is the novel was based on my mother's true experiences. So I looked at the work as a design piece, as an art piece, or like an architect constructing something. And the bones of the structure of the story were true. My mother was born here, she went to Hiroshima, etc. But as I added flesh and detail, I added first her stories that she told me. Then I went to other stories I heard from other people, like at the Minidoka pilgrimage, I heard a number of stories. So that became part of the story, of her story. So I borrowed those. And then as I moved out farther and farther, it just became plain fiction. You know, you have to get to that point. So it was like building the story. And structurally, it moved from true for her, true for others, and finally into the world of fantasy. And Jim Carrey, you know, the comedian, he wrote a book. And in the interview, he said this about his book: none of it is real, but it's all true.
Right.
None of it's real, but it's all true. So I like that. And it's like from fantasy, truth can be revealed. There you go.
Well, just an observation, you know, as I was reading it, there were people who kept coming up and places that kept coming up, and I knew who they were. They had a different name, or they had a different name of the place, but I knew, like Harry Stanford, right? Or who was at Minidoka, the superintendent, or the director of Minidoka. So for me, it was wonderful reading this because I could find the little bits and pieces, and I knew some of the history behind it. So it was being a Seattleite, right? There's so much of it that is set in the Nihonmachi and the Japantown, and places like the Buddhist Temple and Yesler Terrace and you know, Jackson Street, Beacon Hill, like all of these places that you know, I experience, you know, regularly. So it was really fun to read.
Thank you.
Now, transitioning, what was your favorite part of the book?
Okay.
Or most the powerful for you?
Okay, my favorite part was when Hanaya was in Hiroshima, in the countryside, and she was out exploring, and she was caught in quicksand, and she was held firmly in quicksand. And at some point in time, she realized she might die because no one knew where she was. It was getting cold, the sun was going down, and here she was stuck in quicksand. And as she was about ready to pass out, she heard voices, you know, these voices. And the voices asked her, would you like to choose the easy way, or would you like to choose the hard way? And she thought, life is not easy, so I will pick the hard way. And immediately after she made that choice, she was like pulled back into her body. she regained consciousness. And then this young girl shows up, Coco, who's like a Peter Pan character. And Coco gets her out, pulls her out of the quicksand. And this is a major turning point. And it's like Frost and the two roads diverge in a yellow wood. It's a choice. And the choice lasts all her life. And towards the end of her life, Hanaya concludes she had a very hard life, but she wasn't angry because she got what she chose. She got what she chose, a hard life. And so she couldn't have any regrets. And the other thing about the passage that I like is about being stuck. For me, being stuck is the worst thing that can happen. I am someone who needs to move forward, backwards, sideways, but I cannot be stuck. That just is killing for me. And it reminded me of Woody Allen's quote in Annie Hall. He says to Annie, our relationship is like a shark. It has to keep moving to stay alive. And so those were the kind of things that I saw in that turning point segment, in the quicksand, in the choice, and in the, getting unstuck and moving forward.
What was the girl's name? And she referred to her as a modern girl, or what was that?
Her name was Coco.
Coco, uh-huh.
And she wanted to be a modern garu. That's in Japanese.
Modern garu, yes.
A garu, like a modern girl. And she was thinking she wanted to be like a flapper, in America, smoke cigarettes and have a good time with Charleston. And Hanaya pointed out that, I think that's passé. And she said, I don't care. She wanted not to be a Japanese trophy wife. She wanted to be a modern garu in America.
And then she ended up in White River, right? In Auburn or Kent.
She was from White River. And but they were going to, because Coco couldn't be a good girl to be a good lady in Japan, they decided to either send her back to her relatives in Hiroshima and be sent back to Fresno, California, or to other relatives, or back to White River. And we never find out what happened to Coco.
Right.
Which is just some things that happened in life. She did send a little note, but we didn't know what happened to Coco. And Hanaya tried later on, asked some people from White River if they knew Coco, and they didn't.
Right.
So she's just kind of out there.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a most powerful portion, or was that the same as your favorite portion of the book?
That was both. That held a lot of power and meaning, because it was such a turning point, that everything turned on that it gave her life. It gave her a hard life, which she endured and managed. So that would be it.
What were some of the challenges you faced in writing this book?
Well, you touched on it earlier, that, but I'll get back to it in a second. I looked at the book, at the story that I was writing, and by today's standards, it's pretty dull, if you will, if you look at it on the face. By movie standards, there was little real excitement. There's no bad language, no violence, no explicit sex, murder, fistfights, any of that. So I said, how can I make this story interesting? And so I first looked at John Dos Passos, who's an American writer, and this is called USA, and he covers several characters in America. And as he follows their life, he includes like telegrams news stories, songs, things like that. So it gives you a flavor of the time. It draws you in. And so what I wanted to do was to draw people into the time by doing the same thing. I had letters, I had
I
telegrams,
love
yeah,
yeah.
TV, radio. So you got a sense of actually being there and hearing it. And then the other thing, I brought in inanimate places like Hiroshima, Japantown in Seattle, Hiroshima countryside, and I tried to give them life. I tried to create the places so that they had a spirit, and I tried to treat them as if they were a living character. So you could
Mhm.
feel Seattle as a person, if you will. I know Seattle. It's that kind of thing. I know rural Hiroshima. It's that kind of thing. So this is a way that I intentionally tried to layer the story to increase the interest because there's no violence and all that. And then the other book that I looked to was The Octopus by Frank Norris. And it's a turn of the century novel, the other turn of the century, earlier on. And Norris was a naturalist, and they believed that there were natural forces in the world that dominated everything. The most important things were natural forces, not human beings. The individual was not important. And the way this worked out in the novel was the railroad was the octopus, but it had to reach from coast to coast to deliver grain to the starving masses of India. So that was the force that could not be denied. And the ranchers in California stood up against the railroad, and they were simply wiped out because the force of nature had to prevail. And Hanai dealt with several historic forces that were huge. The Depression, the incarceration, things like that, that were totally out of her control. She managed to survive them, and she also managed to kind of surf the tsunami wave of the force, not being inundated by it. And so by doing this, by kind of riding it, she became a force herself, not a capital letter F, like bringing grain to India, but a smaller force. And if my novel has any message for anyone, it is that we will be inundated with forces out of our control. I mean, all you have to do is look outside how we now, live with this pandemic, totally out of our control. And our challenge is to become a force, not to be overcome by these pandemics and the forces outside of our control, but to become a force ourselves. And I can't march anymore. I'm too old for that. So when I get angry, I'm a force by donating to Planned Parenthood or Sudi Rising, the ACLU, or Feeding the Hungry program. And the time to be a force is not tomorrow. The time to be a force is now. Now is the time, because now is when it's needed. So that is hopefully the message I hope people take away from this novel. Be a force, and be a force for social justice, making a change for good. And don't be overcome by all this historic tsunami that's happening.
Mhm. That reminds me of a portion in the book when she's at Minidoka, and it's a scene about the cremation,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And she stands up.
She
Right,
does.
here she is, a pregnant, younger woman, And she, confronts the WRA administration and stands up for what's right and for her community and her family in that situation. And I thought that she had a lot of power and fortitude, and so here she was, being tossed and turned by the forces of what was going on. But at times she just stood up for herself and for what she thought was right.
Yes. Good example.
I wanted to ask you, how much of this is a personal story?
Personal, you mean for me?
Yeah.
Okay. When people ask me that, they say, oftentimes I talk to other people about the book, and they ask me, was this real? One situation. So what I'm asking you is, do you have a specific question about a specific incident? Or are you just saying, was it personal for me generally? Do you have something in mind? Because I'm willing to reveal that now if you had a specific.
Well, I think you were the younger son, right?
Yeah.
And so and you kind of come in and out of the book.
Yeah.
Was that intentional, that you wanted to kind of show yourself at different points in the book?
Yeah, as a child, and you saw me later as an adult. But yes, so it was personal from that point, that character pretty much was like me as much as possible, but it wasn't me. But so I am prepared to give you just a short answer too, since you tossed me a softball there. In terms of my friend Barry, who's a psychiatrist, he's a Jewish psychiatrist, good friend. He once played a game at a party, and he said, can anyone speak to the first memory they can recall? And Barry told his, and they came to me, and I said, the first thing I recalled was when I was 3 years old, and I thought I killed grandma. Because we were playing, making noise. My mother said, don't make noise, and then she died. And I thought I killed grandmother. And I asked my mother for years how she died, and she never would say. So that was absolutely real and personal. But it's something I've shared before. So there are sprinkles of real life things in there. And I think that also, that sense of reality layers it, so that when you read the book, you wonder if this sometimes whether it's real or not. And that's the task of an artist, is to overcome the artifice. You go to a play, you see the paper moon and back, you say it's a paper moon, but as it goes along, you say, hey, that's the moon, and things are happening. And my challenge is to make this real for you. So it's not like I'm just reading a story, but it's like, boy, this sure could be real. And you get into it. And that was part of my challenge. And I think that's a challenge for any artist.
So did writing this book help you process or better understand or heal from your own incarceration experience or related to Minidoka?
No, there was people asked me about my other work and this work. It wasn't cathartic. After writing it, I didn't feel better and everything was, roses and lollipops. But what it did do was it created a different narrative about my past, like a parallel universe where the outcome was different. So in that way, it brought me some comfort and peace. In which case, it was not. But the piece didn't last long, because there are always constant reminders that come up and draw you back to your original anger or whatever it is, sight, sound, music, and such as it is. But in one way, it reminds me of the Javanese and how they teach their children to handle nightmares. A child wakes up after a nightmare, they tell the child, go back to your nightmare and change it. So if there's a monster, you kill it. If there's something else, you take care of it. So the last memory you have is one of killing the monster or solving the problem. And I tried that with my son, and it worked. And I try it too. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But all of this healing is tied to forgiveness. You know, and forgiveness is strange. If I walk up to someone who's done me wrong and I say, I forgive you. I forgive you for what you did to me. And they'll naturally say, oh yeah, fine, goodbye. It means nothing. That in order for forgiveness to happen, they have to come to you and say, will you forgive me for what I've done? And then you can decide. In the case of the incarceration, the government did give an apology, but the government continued to do what it always has done. It continued to throw rocks. It continued to do that same kind of injustice to others. So in other words, their apology was not sincere. There was no healing for me. And the only way the healing could happen is if the government came to me and they changed their ways. They stopped doing what they're doing, putting kids in cages and things like that. So that's why I go back to what I feel the message is, that we need to be agents of change. We need to be forces to push the government for social justice.
Well, what you're saying, it makes me think of, our Nisei and Sansei who fought for that apology, right? Yeah. And the redress movement and decades of work on the part of so many individuals and communities to ultimately get the 1988 Civil Liberties Act passed. It wasn't the government who said, oh, we did wrong, here we're going to come and apologize. It was because our community stood up and advocated for decades to hold the US government accountable.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that, Paul.
I'm going to toss in a little question here about the foxes.
Ooh.
Right? There's these foxes that appear at different points in the book. What was your thinking? Why did you do that? Okay. And I loved it, by the way. I thought it was really cool.
The question is, since it's not real in the real sense, what inspired the foxes? What inspired the appearance of the foxes? Couple of things. One is Akira Kurosawa. Oh, gee, what was the name of that movie? He had The Fox's Wedding in it. And it was a couple of segments. And then you've been to my house and you've seen The Fox's Wedding. I've got 6 or 7 little statuettes of the foxes in The Fox's Wedding. And they are, spiritual creatures, supposedly, and they could change into human beings. And part of it is that, I really like that spiritual, supernatural aspect of it. So in Japan, I felt their supernatural power was bigger because, they're Japanese legends and people believe in them. And so they were big players in Japan. Because she saw The Fox's Wedding, she had to leave Japan. She had to leave the farm. She had to leave Japan. Had she not seen The Fox's Wedding, she would have stayed in Hiroshima and could have been bombed by the A-bomb. So that was a turning point there. The foxes were huge. And then at Minidoka, she liberates a fox. And when she left Japan, before she left, they took her to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller told her that she will save 2 lives and she will dance or something like that. And I count the saving the fox's life from the little kids torturing it in Minidoka as saving a life. And so that's a kind of thread that runs through it. And ultimately, the last fox is one of the young ladies at the mental institution who was a very good friend, Francie Fox, who helped her, the two girls helped her with her depression. And I would say that the girls, her fellow people in the mental institution, incarcerees, if you will, helped her more than the doctors. They helped each other, they supported each other, and they got each other out. And so the foxes ran through there as the physical foxes in the Fox's Wedding from Kurosawa, physical foxes at my house that I see every day, and to the fox at Minidoka, and to Francie Fox. And just for the foxes at my house, when I first got them, the artist damaged the male fox who was in the wedding. And so he was gone. And there was this vibration from these foxes. You could feel it. It was palpable. And then when the artist returned the male fox, it all quieted down. And one day, my cousin, who was very sensitive, she walked into the house, first time she saw the foxes, and she jumped. And I said, "What are you jumping for?" She said, they jumped, they scared me. She felt energy from the foxes. I said, "Oh yeah, okay, fine. What can you say?" But anyway, foxes were important.
Well, it also made me think how much fun, it was to also write this and, create and craft stories and characters and describe places. And it was really inspirational.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there was the characters talk to you after a while. I'm going to do this. No, you're not going to do this. I wouldn't do that. So, okay, I can't do that to you. And then other people think that they are one of the people in the book. And Tess Gallagher was convinced that she was Dutch.
Oh.
One of the girls in the mental institution.
Right.
And she began to advocate for Dutch. Like, oh, this, and I said, no, Tess, no, So it's kind of funny that sometimes people latch on to these people, and they're all composites. They are inspired by different things, different people, different movies, different experiences, and just plain made up. So yeah. It was fun, and I kind of missed the whole gang. And a friend of mine who read the book said she liked it so much and liked the people so much. After she finished, she read it again because she wanted to meet the friends again.
Spending time with the characters. Well, I wanted to ask, who do you consider your target audience for this book?
Well, that's interesting. I looked up how many books are written each year, new books, and there's at least 300,000 new books written each year. I think it's really more than that. And so I focused in on the area of historic fiction. So people who are interested in history would be interested in this. Also, Japanese Americans, obviously, since they suffered the incarceration, and my friends and relatives who I, insist buy the book and all that. And then other people who are interested in learning more about the incarceration. And finally, people who are interested in social justice. So again, takeaway is a social justice message. Become a force. Do not be overcome by the large historic forces engulfing us. Emerge and become a force yourself for change and bring social justice to this world. So that's my message.
Well, I think it's a powerful message and so important and timely right now. I also thought about it sets just everything in Seattle is so vivid to me in the book. And I also thought about Obon. Bonodori keeps coming up in the book throughout the Tankobushi and all the wonderful things about Obon. And this in Seattle, Obon is happening online this year, and it's happening right around now. So it's really beautiful and touching, and I loved reading it. So I'm a big fan.
Okay.
And I think we're coming to the close of our Q&A. And so I just wanted to offer you just one more opportunity to say anything that you would like to say at the end.
Yeah, I want to thank you and all the people who helped make this happen. I want to thank the audience for attending. And I wish that everyone is well and that they take care of themselves. And in the future, I'll see you on the other side after this coronavirus ends and we're out there dancing at the Obon, which you can do the Tankobushi with me. I'm inviting you to. Yes, I can dig it, baby.
All right. Well, here's the book, right?
Yes.
And if folks are interested in purchasing this book, Elliott Bay Book Company, which is a local book company here in Seattle, is selling it online. So I just want to put a plug in for purchasing this book through Elliott Bay Book Company.
Yeah, and Anna, I'd like to add that Kobo at Higo's on Jackson is reopening shortly, and they carry the book as well. And it's an autographed copy if you get it from Kobo's. So
fantastic. We are now in the live portion of this book talk with Larry Matsuda. So many friends have joined us through YouTube. Larry, it's really great to see all these names. So many of them are familiar, associated with the Minidoka pilgrimage, and people calling in from, or chatting in from Idaho, Washington, California, and even Hawaii too. So also want to put the plug in here for the book again, right? We've got a number of questions for you, Larry, that are coming in through the YouTube channel. And I'm just going to start with one of the first ones. And this one is from a person who identifies as TL. So TL asks, do you plan to write more fiction, Larry?
no, I don't, but I just might. I want to get back to poetry. Fiction is so much work. It really is. With a book of poem, you start with a bang, a poem that really grabs you, and then you go la 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 la, and then you hit them again in the middle with another grabber, and then la 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 la, and then you kill them in the end. I understand that form for a book of poetry, but with fiction, it's a lot different. The rhythm is different. The whole characters are different. And I don't plan on doing it again. I'm too old for this, I think.
We'll see about that. Okay. Our next question is from Gordon. And Gordon writes, you started by saying you thought that there is a book in everyone. What signs do you notice when you have a new one forming to help us recognize that feeling for one of us? So I think this person is wondering, like, how do I know that I have a book inside of me if I want to take that next step?
Right. That's a good question. I still believe everyone has a book in themselves. And the first thing is, what is really helpful is if you're a collector, if you collect stuff. and collecting experiences, collecting stories, and knowing that you have a basic story in yourself, but you have this collection, this arsenal of stories that you've saved up that you could put in there that actually begs to be told. And one clear sign is if you go to a party and you tell stories, that means you're a storyteller. And so that means it's in you and needs to come out. So I would say be a collector, mass it all together, and one of these days in a dream or in a revelation, it'll all come out and you're going to say, hey, that's a great story. I got to tell it to someone.
It's so much fun reading. It was so much fun reading this book. And, for anybody who hasn't read it yet, I really encourage you to do so. So many familiar people, places, and you can bring it all to life, right? Through your imagination. You did that so beautifully. We have another question. This one is from our friend Ken Mochizuki. And he writes, Larry, in your career in education, do you advocate for more teaching and curriculum on the forced removal incarceration? And what reaction do you receive?
Well, it's really crazy because in 1969, that is 1969, I started the first, it was called Oriental American History class at Sharpless. It was a junior high school, not middle school, junior high school, way back when. And it ran for a year. And we got good reaction from the kids and from the community. And ironically, one of the things that we did do as part of our class project was to make miniature barracks. And it just so happened that I was talking to Tomio Moriguchi at the time, and they were working on an exhibit. And I helped name the exhibit, which is The Pride and the Shame. That's one title that I gave to it, and they accepted it. I was surprised. And then they accepted the concept of including the little miniature barracks, which they had someone do much better than the junior high kids. And that exhibit went on, and in one person's book, I think it's called Made in Seattle by Shimabukuro,
right,
he states that the Pride and the Shame exhibit was the start of the redress movement. It started in Seattle, and that exhibit lit the fire. So that's my best answer to your question, Ken.
So that was a force, right?
It was.
Starting something like that, and it moved people. And it's all about action and raising your voice and doing things for the community and advocating. We have another question. This one is from Leslie Morshta. She writes, how much does the father, Kiyoshi, reflect your real father in how his story unfolds and in his character?
Okay, again, as I say, he inspired it. It wasn't letter for letter, but he was a very successful grocer, businessman before the war, ran several grocery stores. He was kind of a hotshot. And then after the war, he couldn't get the store going back together. He had to become a janitor, and it really took a toll on his self-image and pride. And I think it really hurt him a lot. And so in that sense, it was based on, that was true of my father. I think the incarceration really affected his personal standing as a man, as a human being. And it was an emasculating experience for him, I believe.
I think that was shared by a lot of the Issei men, right?
No.
I see a note in here from Pat L. She writes, you're not too old for anything. You're a force.
Well, thank you very much. I will share this with you. Recently on the news, we saw this one protester who got shoved down. He fell on his head, hurt his head, and he was bleeding from the ear. You remember that? I can't remember where it was, but that was a vivid image in my mind. And the announcer said, and this elderly man was pushed down and was in the hospital. And the guy was 75. And I said, holy smokes, I'm elderly too.
Well, Ken Mochizuki writes, so you're the father of redress.
No, here's the other thing. Whenever something's a success, it has 1,000 mothers and 1,000 fathers. Failure is an orphan. So there are 1,000 mothers and fathers to redress.
So true. So true. Well, we have a next question for you, and this is about your book release. So it comes from Mia, and Mia writes, what did you originally have planned for the book release? Do you still want to do events in the future? When is it possible to meet in person again?
Yes, I had at least 4 readings scheduled, one at Kobo at Higo's, and they were all canceled because of the coronavirus. And the book was just released in December and never really hit the stands till late January. And I never got a copy of it until February. And then by March, we were all closed down. So I tried to put it out on social media, but that had mixed results. And this is about as good as I can get. I don't know when we can meet in person again, but I'm looking forward to, being out there again.
Yeah. We'll be also starved for social interaction. We just, see each other and not want to leave each other. Another question from Aaron is, Larry, you've accomplished so much in your career. What were some of your big turning points, such as those of Hane's you write about?
Wow. That's a good question. There are a number of turning points, but one that I would like to point to was I left teaching after 2.5 years, and I had an opportunity to become a counselor at the University of Washington. And there were many pluses and minuses. As a teacher, you had the summers off. You kind of enjoyed a bunch of kids, teaching a bunch of kids. Going to the university and being a counselor was a whole different show, and you worked all year long. And I thought, should I do this or should I not? Should I stay as a teacher or should I move on? And my friend, Pat Romines, who was a librarian at the time, and he was my 4th grade teacher, said to me, Larry, take it. You can always go back and become a teacher. You can always go backwards and become a teacher. So I remembered that, and I switched jobs and became a counselor. After that, I became a state-level administrator, working in Olympia and then Seattle Public Schools. And I counted up something like 13 different job titles, switching back and forth. And then I retired. So I'd say that was a big turning point, is to have the confidence to make that career break when you could have been safe. And I just took a chance. And the other one was when I retired at age 42, I think. Yes. And
42?
42, I think it was. Yeah. Or maybe it was 47. I don't know. But I retired quite early, and I was worried about what I would do. But I've never had any lack of work, if you will. So
You've made work for yourself.
I did, yes. I'm trying to figure out how old I was when I retired, but I think it was 43 or 44. I wasn't that old. Yeah.
That's definitely very young for retirement in these times.
Yeah, 47.
A little jealous.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I have for you is that there is Christianity in this book, so much about Christianity, and then there's so much about Buddhism in this book. Can you tell us about what you were thinking when you were writing about these two religions and places and experiences related to the two religions?
Wow. Who asked that? That's a tough question.
That's an original.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, in real life, my mother was a very solid Christian. She had no doubts about that, and she was going to make us make the kids Christians. And what that really meant was, if you will, using the Christian paradigm, that she left all of her relatives, her ancestors, in Buddha's heaven, if you will, and she chose Christian heaven, and she was going to take us with her. So that's in real life. And so in thinking about that decision, I wondered what were some of the dynamics of it, that she was exposed a lot to Buddhism, and it had a lot of positive factors, and she was exposed to Christianity, and it had a lot of positive factors. This is in the book. And so the tension back and forth was with that, what happens if you're a Buddhist, and they taught us in Sunday school, in real life, that if you aren't a Christian, you go to hell. And so I was really worried about my Buddhist friends, because I didn't know whether to tell them what was going to happen to them, and I decided not to. But Kashima, who's the son of a son of a son of a Buddhist priest, when I relayed that story to him, he said, "We're not going to hell." And I said, "Why not? Why not?" He said, "Because we don't believe in it." And I said, "Oh, wow, that's the answer." And so you get some of that sense of that in the book, the fear of them going to hell and maybe not, and what's right. And it's never resolved in the book. They're just both playing back and forth. And it is, what you believe in is what's going on. That's kind of what came out of the book. Yeah. That was your question?
Yep.
Oh, I knew it.
So that's really fascinating to me how the different characters and how you talk about it. And I have another question for you, and it's a topic that both of us really enjoy, and that's talking about matsutake mushrooms. Can you tell us about the matsutake mushrooms and where they're featured in the book?
Yes. In real life, the inspiration was my father. They used to call him Matsutake Kyoshi because he had this reputation for finding matsutake. And one year he made so much money on matsutake, he was able to buy a new Chrysler car. Well, this is like 1930 something car. And so that was a real sense of pride for him. And he used to brag about it. And people would follow him in the woods. Japanese would follow him because he always had secret places. And when I was a kid, he did take me to some of the secret places, which I think now are probably occupied by condos, how quickly things change or how quickly they disappear. But it was inspired by my father, who in real life, was a very good mushroom hunter.
Mm-hmm. I'm seeing the chat in the YouTube, and I thought I'd just read a couple things here. One of them says, Tetsuden, so Tetsuden Kashima, and I think his wife is on this chat. Tetsuden is a genius.
Yes.
Right? Another one from Chris D, talking about the Christianity and Buddhism, says, I'm Sansei. I think we all grew up with Christian and Buddhist upbringing.
Yeah.
It was just a part of our lives.
Right. And
Mia writes in, can you tell us your matsutake spots?
No. You go out looking for a condo. That's where they are.
And sometimes they're not there the next year. It all depends on the moisture, you know,
Yeah.
where they had been there every year. You know, if the moisture's not right, then they might not be there. Or
Mia,
somebody might have already picked them already.
ask Anna. She knows where they are.
We'll see how it goes this fall.
Very good.
Well, this it looks like
Time's up.
there's one more here. Let me just read it a little bit. From Gail K. How did sex workers, people with mental illness, etc., manage to fit in and live in the rather restrictive Japanese American community?
Wow. I don't know whether I have an answer for that, but the legend is that there were sex workers in the Japanese community, and their clients were predominantly Japanese. And I don't know much about it, but I do know people who know about it, but I'm not going to say that now.
Gotta put in a spicy one at the end there.
Yeah.
And well, we've come to the end of the book talk, and I want to give you one last opportunity to take the floor. You deserve it. So
Well,
say whatever you'd like.
Thank you very much, Anna, for your work. And I just want to wish everyone a good day, a good life, and hang in there and be strong and become a force. And if we all become a force and we get together, we can be a big force for social justice and change. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks, everybody.